I think the passion, me loving what I was doing, that really drove me through when times were really hard, when the money wasn't really coming in, where people didn't really know or care about what I was doing, and time where I was just all by myself doing work in my room on my computer. So the passion is what's going to get you through it, because if you don't have that passion and that meaning behind it, it's going to be hard for you to justify getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning to go do work and working all day, working 18, 20 hours a day and not really getting any sleep. It's going to really be really hard to justify that if you don't have that passion and that reason behind it. So that's why I feel like that is what has to be. It has to be a motivating factor. It can't just be money. It has to be something deeper than that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. I'm your host, Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and their experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. When it came to naming the podcast Oh My Curry Goodness, I broke it down into two parts. One more personal, but the other is because it's relatable. When we hear stories that are interesting, shocking, inspiring, we say, oh my goodness. And I added curry because it's my favorite food, and sometimes we like to use curse words or very strong words to further emphasize the goodness part. But I wanted to use a rather funny or comical term, even though it is a popular dish in certain countries. I wanted to put oh my curry goodness because it is something that I actually say in real life. Although sometimes I do get weird looks like, why are you saying this? But beside the point, I hope what I hope people can take away from this podcast is taking valuable lessons from each guest in terms of their story and what they have learned from these experiences, because storytelling is a great way to connect with people in a very humanistic way. And I just hope that when you listen to these people, that you recognize that regardless of who you are or your background or where you come from, that you're capable of doing incredible things. And I hope you guys are inspired by these stories of the people I've had on this podcast. Now, my guest this week is Siraj Woods, who is the founder of SWC, which is a social media marketing agency whose mission is to help Black-owned businesses through social media. Now, while Siraj is doing incredible things with social media, we have some sort of connection in the sense that Siraj was once a computer science major, and as someone who's currently a computer science major, it's cool in a way to connect with someone who has some sort of experience. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about computer science, but also more importantly, his journey as a person and with what he's doing with SWC. So, Siraj Woods, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much, Hamza, for having me. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast.
Yeah, I am really happy to connect and have you on the podcast. I remember first when I first met you, there were so many things that we had in common in terms of our passion, our weird relation with computer science, and just using our platform to inspire people. Now, I know, like I said, you were once a computer science major, but then you switched to something else. But I do want to ask you a couple of questions about computer science. So I've said this on the podcast, and I'm sure, and I think we've talked about this as well, which is that there are certain experiences you can still take away from, regardless if they're good or bad. I want to ask you whether it's regardless if it's on the non-technical side of computer science or on the technical side, what are some skills or traits or characteristics you've learned as someone who once majored in computer science?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I would say the biggest thing that I've learned is that sometimes when you're doing something, you have to take a step back to see whether or not it's really working, whether it's something that you really want to do. So for me, when I first got into computer science when I was in college, I was really just more so motivated about the promise of a job and the high salary from graduating. So I wanted to be a software developer, software engineer, because I knew that they would make in the upwards of six figures. And that was really more so my motivating factor. So when I didn't really do well my first year and 2 years in college, because those computer science classes, as you know, they can be very difficult. And if you don't have a passion for computer science, and I wasn't one of those people that was coding all day, because I was in class with those people, and those guys, they were always on the computer looking just like this. And I wasn't one of those people. So they would go and they would get their internships and they would be asking extra questions after class. And I just wanted to hurry up and get out of there and go do something else. So I say the biggest thing that I learned was that sometimes you have to be willing to pivot when things are working. And that's something that I wish I would have learned a little bit sooner, because I probably will be further along in the area that I am right now. and also to not just do things for the money. I know money is obviously a great motivator. People want to do stuff. People want to get paid. This is a very expensive world and it's a tough world that we live in, but not just jumping into something, into a career, especially for people that are in college right now that are in a major that they might not necessarily like, not just being in it because you want to get a high paying job afterwards, but actually making sure that you want to do it. If you really want to be a computer scientist, great, but make sure that you actually love the process of coding and developing software rather than just the promise of getting a high paying job afterwards. Because even if you graduate with that degree, if you don't really like the job, it's going to still be hard for you to get that job anyway.
I love everything you said when it comes to when you're talking about the why behind the things that you do. I know that's a very common thing I talk about on this podcast, but I think it's important because yes, computer science majors do make a lot of money, but it's really important to figure out there's a difference between a want and a have to. So like if you want to do computer science, that's a much different mindset than you have to do computer science because it's again going back to that passion. And I will say this in the sense that computer science, I don't know about other fields because I'm not in those fields, but as far as computer science, it really is about process and patience because it's so easy to focus on the final product. It's easy to go, we want to do this to create this. But instead of going from A to Z, we have like it's all about going from A to B to C to D, and it's about that process. And yes, while money is important and all that stuff, because it is important, especially, and I know we'll talk a bit about risk taking because that's an interesting thing about you. Um, Being able to focus on the want and just embracing every obstacle is important. And if you don't like those challenges or obstacles, then it's not a great fit for you. And it's important to be able to pivot. Um, which kind of leads me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is passion, because there are people who are passionate about computer science, and there are also people who are passionate about fields that maybe are, I guess, quote unquote, not the most popular. So I don't know how you grew up or how what the culture was like around you, but I've talked about this in in many episodes where, as someone who's South Asian, we have a weird definition of success, and success will be determined by how much money a person makes as opposed to the impact a person makes. And I feel like a lot of the guests I've talked to focus more so on impact and rather than income. Not saying that it's one is not. I'm not saying income is like not important, but it's we really want to be able to find our purpose in giving back to people as opposed to just thinking about ourselves in a way. So people sometimes people have different interpretation as to how they define success or whether a person is a like they're succeeding or we should really compare. But if you were to, I guess, be an advocate for people who are trying to find their passion, given that not everyone understands a person's passion because a passion is more or internal, like you are very passionate about podcasting or social media marketing or whatever that may be, why do you think passion is important? Even though that it's like internal and maybe people don't understand, why is that first step important for anybody?
I would say that passion is really important because it's really I think it's what's going to get you through the down part of the journey because life is very much about the journey, the up and down. It's like a wave, ocean. So you have high points where you're really high and everything's going amazing, and then you crash out, and then everything's going terrible, and you hate your life. So the passion is what's going to keep you going consistently through the journey, and what's going to keep you from not quitting. Going back to the computer science thing that we were talking about, I didn't have the same drive getting up every day and going to class and doing that homework and taking those exams as I did when I ended up starting my business. I did have more motivation. I realized I had to do more. I had to do more outside research. I had to do more work. I had to work longer hours. I had to do things that people weren't necessarily doing in order to get to the positions I am right now. And I think the passion, me loving what I was doing, that really drove me through when times were really hard, when the money wasn't really coming in, where people didn't really know or care about what I was doing, and time where I was just all by myself doing work in my room on my computer. So the passion what's going to get you through it because if you don't have that passion and that meaning behind it, it's going to be hard for you to justify getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning to go do work and working all day, working 18, 20 hours a day and not really getting any sleep. It's going to really be really hard to justify that if you don't have that passion and that reason behind it. So that's why I feel like that is what has to be. It has to be a motivating factor. It can't just be money. It has to be something deeper than that.
Absolutely, for sure. Now, here's one of my favorite questions I've been asking people, and I'm not going to ask you this because when I was getting ready for this, it felt like you've already answered this question, which is that just because you are passionate about something, it doesn't mean that your journey is going to be easy. And when I was getting ready, as I was getting ready to know you, I was seeing all the things that you had to do that you don't want to do, whether that's on the financial side or just growing your business in general, or just you as a person in general. But one of the things that's really important and why am one of the things I connected with you aside from computer science is being the hardest worker in the room. And as cliche as it sounds, you don't people I don't think people realize what that necessarily means because it like when it comes to hard work, like you have to do things that you don't want to do. So as a podcaster, you have to edit your videos. You have to figure out what kind of questions to ask because you can't just ask the same questions they've already been asked. I'm sure as someone I was getting to know about you, you were someone who really had to learn the ins and outs of social media because you went from computer science to a completely different route. And then figuring out I know you focused a lot on networking, so being able to win people over for your vision. I know this is a very cliche thing, but I often feel like cliche things are the things that people forget at the end of the day. But tell me about the importance when it comes to being the hardest worker in the room, especially when it comes to passion, because there are a lot of people who are passionate about certain things, but what really stands out from a person is the work that they put in, even when they don't need to put in that work.
Yeah, I think it's very important to be a hard worker and the hardest worker, especially if you have deficits or deficiencies in certain areas. Going back to how you mentioned my how I do go out and I like to network now and meet with people. Before, when I was in middle school and high school, I was a very shy and introverted person. You would ask anybody who I went to school with if I would be doing interviews and speaking to people and speaking publicly and doing podcast interviews, if they had ever imagined me doing that, and they would say absolutely not because I wouldn't even open my mouth and utter two sentences to you. Like, like people, when I was in school, I never had braces in school, but people thought I had braces because I didn't talk at all. Like I didn't open my mouth. I would be walking the hallway, my head would be down. I didn't want you to notice me. I was very, very shy. And that's something that I had to work very hard to overcome because I had a deficiency in that. And now I was able to turn that from something that was terrible at something that I'm now pretty good and borderline great at. So it's very important when you don't have what you need, you don't have the skills, you don't have the resources, you don't have the information. You have to work extremely hard to overcome those deficiencies because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. If you start out with $0 and you don't work a certain amount of hours, then it's going to be really hard for you to get up to $1,000, then 10,000, then 100,000. You know, there's steps and there's checks and balances that come with that, and the work it can squeeze that amount of time into condensing that to making it shorter. So I can condense the amount of time for me not having certain skills by working longer hours. So that way that in the long term, I'm actually going to get farther than somebody that's working less hours than me and not putting in as much work as I am.
Yeah, we talk more about being the hardest worker in the room, because I do want to focus on the fact that sometimes you have to make certain sacrifices that people may not understand. And I love meeting people that can sometimes be misunderstood, where it's like, oh, they're this way, but maybe Siraj is a different way, and you don't really understand that. One of the things that I do appreciate you talking about, which is that you were once a shy kid, and now you're this person who's very outgoing, who likes to talk to people, connect with people, have conversations. And it's weird because before starting this podcast, I think my communication skills is a roller coaster. So there were days where I felt like I was a very outgoing person. Other days or other times I was an introverted kid. I think before the podcast I was more introverted, and now with the podcast it's like back to extrovert, introvert, extrovert, introvert. The point that I want to make is there was this transition you made from being a shy kid to now be able to be this outgoing, engaging in conversations. That takes a lot of courage, and it's about embracing that uncomfortness. What was the first step? And I always say, and I'm sure many entrepreneurs or people in general would agree to this, the first step is often the most difficult step. What was the first step in terms of trying to go from this shy kid to being the person that allowed you to be able to get out of your comfort zone and being able to talk to new people? What was that first step for you?
The first step would be, and it took a lot of internal reflecting, but the first step for me was when I really boiled down to it. And I think that when we're in school, we just have so much going on. There's so much peer pressure. There's so much going on around us. We let people on the outside play so much of a contributing factor into why we are as people. But for me, I really had to sit down myself and tell myself that I'm the problem, that I'm the issue. I'm the reason why I'm not where I want to be. I'm the reason why I'm not as developed in certain areas as I want to be, because if I really wanted to be that, I could do that. And I had proven that to myself that if I really wanted to do something, I could do it. So there's no reason that I'm letting other people or outside influences stop me from doing something that I want to do. And it has to be on me. So once I really put all the onus on me and I put all the blame and all the shame on myself, it it empowered me as a person, because now I can't blame anybody else. I can't blame my parents. I can't blame the people that might not have treated me the best in school. I can't blame my teachers. I can't blame anybody else. I can only blame myself. And when you can only blame yourself, you only look at yourself, then you can only go up from there, because it's only you. It's all on you. I can't say, oh, my mom didn't do this or my dad didn't do this or my grand whatever. I can't blame anybody. I can only look at myself. So if you can only look at yourself, you can only go up from there. And it really is self-empowering to have the onus on your life to say, I am the reason why I'm either going to succeed or not succeed. But I'm not, I can't put this on anybody else. And I won't let anybody else have that power over me about why I didn't do what I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of putting it because it's like you people we always say that we can be our worst enemy, even though there are a lot of people that may not like us or that may not agree with what we do, or we just we don't think that our work benefits people. It is about what do we think, and we can stop ourselves from really reaching that potential. And I think that's a great way of realizing that yeah, you are your worst enemy because it's like you're not necessarily being like it's not necessarily you talking down on yourself or like making it sound like you're not worth anything or like you're not it's not as if your self-worth or self-confidence is low. It's just that the realization that yes, while there are certain factors, you are you are the reason why you're not reaching that. So it's about getting out of your comfort zone. And getting out of your comfort zone is a really weird topic for a lot of people because we're so used to just it's either being liked by people, we're so used to not going against the current because it's about those risk taking. But one of the things that we've we've been open about is that sometimes you have to lose people in order to reach a greater purpose. Now, I'm not saying losing people like cutting friendships off or anything like in a really extreme way, but more so in the sense that you are very passionate about the things you're passionate about, and people don't understand it, and because they don't understand it, they go, "All right, it's time to move on from Siraj, or it's time to move on from so and so," because whatever reason. And yet these people who are cut off or they lose these friends, they end up doing a lot of incredible things because it's about their purpose and what they want to do. I think in these times it's very difficult to ask yourself if you're doing the right thing because either you're not getting the results, it's not something people have done, it's not something that other people are doing. So it's like you're starting really from scratch. How do you know if you're doing the right thing? And I've asked this question to a lot of my guests, but I'm always curious to know about their perspective because there's a reason why you're doing the things that you do. And it goes back to passion in the sense that even if it's not 100% perfect, it's a process and that it's going to take some time before we really do get to see all the incredible things that you deserve.
Oh, that's a really good question. So how do you know that you're doing the right thing? I would say it's honestly an internal thing, because, and that goes back to also what I said before about how you can't let people really steer you or determine your judgment or your outview of yourself, because that can be a really dangerous and treacherous ship to sail. I would say those conversations really happen when you're self-reflecting, when you're by yourself at night, and it's just you, and you're really thinking about your life and where you're going and your trajectory and how everything's looking and the decisions that you made, the mistakes that you made, the achievements that you had, and are all of those encompassing things, are they all going towards the greater purpose? And if you feel like everything that you're doing is leading you to the greater purpose and what you envisioned and dreamed of when you were a kid, then I feel like you can say that you're doing the right thing. But if everything that you're doing in your life is not aligning to the person that you want to be and that you thought you were going to be when you were growing up, because time is moving on and we only have so many hours in a day, every minute is waning. So when you waste a certain amount of time and you look up and you realize, wow, I'm really not as far as I want to be. And the people that were near me at this when I was at that point, they're way further ahead now than I am at this point. You really have to look at yourself and say, wow, like, am I doing the right thing? And the answer to that is no. But if you're doing everything that you feel like you can do in your power and the God given ability that you are being given, are you using all of that to be the person that you need to be and to make the world a better place in the limited amount of capacity that you can do it? Then I think you're doing the right thing. But if all of those things aren't aligning, then something's not adding up and you have to start to look back at yourself.
Yeah, and what I will say, I don't know, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, but when I was little, I used to focus a lot on quantity instead of quality of friends. And now as I get older, and I think, and I'm sure there are many people that have the same idea, is that it's not about quantity over quality, it's about quality over quantity in terms of the people you meet. I don't know if that's something, if quality over quantity was something that you've embraced your whole life when it comes to friendships, or if it's more of like, no, I used to be the type of person where it was about getting as many friends as possible, and then at some point you realize it's actually more important to focus on how important those friendships are. I'm curious to know your relationship between quality and quantity.
No, that's definitely good. I think that, and that's something that I kind of just came across recently because I just turned 25 and I had a birthday event in DC, and I invited a few of my really good friends that I'm still really cool with, and they came out and we got to celebrate. But there was a time where I arguably had more friends than I do at this point. And even people that are maybe their former schoolmates, we played on a sports team together, we were just acquaintances. I would have considered those people to be my friends at a certain point. But like you said, it gets to a point where when you're really going and you're getting older and you're starting to level up and achieve, that you do have to start looking at the quality of people around you, and not everybody deserves to have your time and your space. And it's nothing against, other people, but it's just a matter of, are we going in similar directions, or do we have similar shared beliefs at this point in our lives? And sometimes we just tend to hold on to the past just because the past was so glorious. Oh, we remember that time when we got so drunk at this bar and we had a great time and we blacked out. But if I'm holding on to that now that I'm 25 and going on further and further, that type of stuff means less and less and less to me. And it's about the quality of relationships that we have rather than just the amount of time we might have spent together at a certain point earlier on in our lives. So it definitely does get to a point where you have to start looking at the people around you because, and I know it's cliche to say, but you really are the sum of the five people that you hang out with the most. And if those people aren't quality, or if there's somebody in there that's not really the greatest person and you have aspirations of being a great person, you have to start looking at those people because they do impact you and affect you, and they can infect you a lot more than you realize if you don't pay attention to those types of things.
I don't think I've actually asked this question, so I'm going to put you on the spot here. But we talked about, like you said, that you are an average of your five friends. I struggle with this question when someone asks me what makes a good, like, how do you define a good friend? And I ask this in a very broad sense, in the sense that as long as they're respectful, that they are giving honest feedback, and they're supportive, they're a great friend. But I feel like that's a really broad way, so I don't really know how to answer that. If I'm looking at Siraj's friends right now, all the friends, like all the really good friends you have, what would you say are the characteristics of a good friend based on your personal opinion?
So the number one thing that I value above anything in a friendship is loyalty. So I'm really big on loyalty, and because the other stuff, it can be superficial. Like you can be a millionaire and your friend have $200 to his name, and that doesn't change the dynamic of the relationship if the connection is still there, if the loyalty is still there. So I think that the loyalty and, like you said, the the ability to really have that relationship and connection with people, because that relationship has to be genuine. They have to be a loyal person to you, and you have to be loyal to them as well. It runs both ways. But you also have to have a genuine connection to where when you're around these people, they make you feel good and they give you a certain euphoria that you're not getting around certain people. Like you have a certain, you can tell certain stories, you can say certain things about that person that nobody else can say to them or they can't say to you. So it's really about those types of things, and it starts to get deeper than the superficial. It's also about the emotional aspect of it too. Like you guys have a really good emotional bond with each other. So I would say the relationship, the emotional connection, and then the loyalty. Are they a loyal person to you? Because if this is somebody that is going to do this with every single person that they are friends with, and we know people like that where everybody's their best friend. They have seven best friends, and they're telling everybody each other's information. But I know if I know that I can tell my good friend something that I expect this person to keep in confidence, and I know they can do that, then I know that I have a really good friend in my hands. And there's not a lot of people, unfortunately, that you can do that with.
Absolutely, I really agree with that. And I can tell that you really do value human connections, and it's unfortunate that we don't really see that. And it's like it's almost ironic in the sense that because as someone who's involved in social media, we are now in this digital world where we think we know a person based on what they look like on other social media platforms, and it's so easy to forget that we are human beings. And yes, it's great to connect with people virtually, but it's even more important to connect with people from a personal level. So I do appreciate that. Going into SW Creative or SWC, excuse me, I there were so many things that I want to talk about. Especially there's a thing you say, there's a thing on your website, seeing it or see it, want it, create it, which I thought was a really cool phrase, and I want to talk about that later. But before we talk about the purpose and the connection you have with it, I've the one of the common things I see on your on SWC's website is the color green. Now, I we haven't talked about this, but Siraj, I know you graduated from Ohio University, which is not the same thing as Ohio State University for those who are outside of Ohio. But tell me a bit about the color green, and I'll tell you, as someone who named the podcast "Oh My Curry Goodness," the reason why it's more so orange, yellow, reddish is because those are the types of colors you see in South Asian cultures when it comes to curry. So I'm curious to know what your relationship with the color green is.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I haven't been asked that. So as you like you said, I did go to Ohio University, and our the colors at the school are primarily green and white. And I won't say that that had a direct impact on it, but I guess it had an indirect impact because I was around it so much. But I would say at the start, the green, it really, for me personally, when I was designing it, thinking about how I wanted the company and the structure to look like, it was really just more so about the color of creativity and of nature and natural energy. And I think creativity comes from all of those aspects of just being natural and energy and just having organic thoughts and ideas. So that's really where the green came from. I wanted it to be a very natural thing that you're seeing. So when you see it, it's like, oh, okay, like you never forget it. Like I want you to see the color, and then you never forget that shade of green ever in your life. So that's really where it more so came from. But I guess the Ohio University connection, it did have an indirect impact on it.
Yeah, and no, I really do like I love how you talked about that relationship because I mean, yes, organizations have a name and they have a purpose, but you cannot deny the level of creativity that is put into naming something or just like the whole background of it. So when I saw that, I was like, I know in many interviews I see Siraj in green, so I'm like, what is this relationship like? So it's really cool to see. Tell me a bit about the see it, want it, create it, see it, want it, create it phrase, because I think that's such a really, it's something that I feel like a lot of people, I didn't realize like that's a phrase that I follow when especially when I created this podcast. So I saw something that I was really interested in, which is the idea of talking to people. I wanted to do this, and here I am creating Oh My Curry Goodness, and I've done 51 episodes. I can't remember off the top of my head. But tell me a bit about how you came up with that phrase and how often do you continue to follow that? Because for anybody, regardless if it's with SWC, with podcasting, or just anything in general, it's very hard to continue to follow that process as you continue on, because as you continue on, each day presents a lot of challenges, and it can you can very easily forget, or you can easily break that cycle just because you have this like version of you saying it's not getting the results that you need.
That's another good question. I would say that it definitely started off, obviously, SWC. It started off as okay. I'll go into a backstory and I'll help me give you a better answer. So before I started SWC, I was in a fraternity at Ohio University called Kappa Alpha Psi. And my original role at the fraternity was to design our logos and our flyers and basically run our social media. So at the time, I had never designed a flyer basically at any point in my life. But I started doing it, I started working on it, and I got really good at it. And then I could tell that I had it, going back to what we talked about passion. I could tell that I had a passion for it because I would stay up very late and work on flyers and work on like logos for us and just making our social media look really good. Like I built this a website at the time when I was on campus. And I could tell that I had a real passion for that because I would be doing that and I would be neglecting the computer science work that I was supposed to be doing. So I was doing that. And then eventually I realized that people needed that service because at the time COVID was going on, there was a lot more people that were looking to start businesses and get big online and get on social media and do that sort of thing. So I ended up starting the business off of the need of creating digital content for other people. And it basically came down to the thought process that I had when it came to creating and when it came to coming up with new innovative ideas. And the first one is, and you have probably have the same experience, like you said, is first you have to see it. You have to, and it's kind of hard for me to explain, but when you have the vision, when you really like when you first started your podcast, you're like, oh, I want to start a podcast. Like you saw it, like I see it. Okay, I see it. It's there. Like I have the vision. But then the next part is a little bit scarier because we see things all the time that we want, but do we really want it? And that's going into the next aspect is, okay, I see it, but now I really want it. Like, okay, now like I'm thinking about it. Like now I'm looking up podcasts. Like I'm looking up what type of podcast should I start? Like I'm looking up how to start a podcast. Like I'm designing the logo. Like I'm working on the website. I'm reaching out to people and trying to get them on the podcast. And then you have to actually go and create it. So it's really a three-step thing of going from seeing it and having the vision and then deciding, oh, okay, this is what I want to do and I don't care what anybody's judgment is. This is it right here. And then going about and actually putting in the work to create it and making that thing a visual reality. So taking it from the thought to the heart to actually the vision and actually seeing it as a real thing. So that's basically where it came from. So I feel like once you break it down, it can be transcribed into how anyone who has a really big idea or thought how it first started off. It first started off as a vision that they ended up wanting, and then they ended up turning it into something. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, and I would say I feel like as of seeing it is the easiest part because it's with our eyes. Wanting it is a bit difficult because it's like it goes back to that question, how badly do you want it? And then when you create it, now you're putting words into actions. And we talked about this before, which is that not everyone will understand our intentions, but and that's why it's hard because it's like, okay, now it's all about, do I continue doing this or do I just follow the social norm? Right? Like for it's like, yeah, following the social norm. So the action or the creativity part is the hardest part, but the way you broke it down is really insightful, and I think it's something that a lot of people can definitely follow. Um, Before we wrap up, let's talk a bit about the idea of helping people. You have obviously with SWC, you have a vision to help Black owned businesses with social media. And even though it's social media, and I know people think that, yes, that's a digital thing, you're still helping people. You're still helping businesses reach their potential because they deserve it. And it's especially hard because there are so many people who have such a incredible product vision, whatever that may be, and yet they're not getting that recognition that they deserve. But I want to break it down into a personal way because I feel like even personal experiences can help influence what you do with SWC. Take me back to a time when you made an impact on someone's life. It doesn't have to be with SWC. It can just be just Siraj as just a human being. Tell me a time where you made an impact on someone's. Tell me about a time you made an impact on someone on your personal life, and how often do you use that experience when you're working on SWC? Because you have a mission to help people. So tell me a bit about that personal experience you felt like you were like, wow, that reminds me a lot of what I do with SWC.
Mm, Okay, that's a really good question. Uh, I would say recently, so actually yesterday I got the opportunity to go to a high school in Baltimore County and basically help kids. They're going to a pitching competition where they're going to pitch business ideas in California. And I got to go to the school and basically help them with their pitch and how they will go about using it and judging them basically as practice for when they go on to do the actual pitching competition. And just seeing how before I started this was just an idea that I had in my I lived in a fraternity house when I started this. This was just an idea I had in my room at the time, and this was nothing, and nobody cared about SWC, and nobody cared about who I was at the time. And now that this has gotten big enough to the point where I'm able to use the platform and I'm getting opportunities to actually go back and help high school kids and talk to kids where as I was once a really shy high schooler who I would have loved if somebody like me would have came back and talked to me as a younger person and given me that insight and advice. So really just the opportunities that I've been able to get because of building something that has, like you said, impacted a lot of people in terms of our ability to help promote businesses and get them more awareness. And now people are starting to recognize the work that we're doing. It's really amazing, honestly, because this is what I always wanted to do. I always wanted to have a platform to where I could use it to help other people. And obviously, outside of making money, the biggest thing that you want to do is be a benefit to mankind and humanity. And I feel like if you do that, then everything else, all the superficial stuff, it comes later on. But using something that was just an idea, how I saw it, I wanted, and I created it, and then it turned into something that was big enough to where now people are inviting me to come and speak to kids. Where I was by far the youngest person out of the group that I was in to be speaking to the kids. I'm thinking like, wow, I know I've been out of high school for a minute, but wow, like I still feel like I kind of connect to these kids a little bit. I still see the younger me in them when I go and I speak to them. So it's really amazing to use what has been given to me and my skills to eventually go on and give back to other people and give back to the community.
I really do appreciate the fact that you said you still have a connection to high schoolers in the sense that it's very easy to think that just because you graduated from high school that it's like it's time to move on. And yes, in a way, but there is a sense of like there are people who resonate with you and it's your chance to help them. Now, you are the founder of or SWC. You obviously have a mission to give back to people and help when needed. You're also you're also a risk taker, and I think there was an article where you talked about how you have the nickname calculated risk, and for a lot of and I used to think, now I realize that there's a difference between risk taking and stupidity. Risk taking does require some sort of planning, whereas stupidity is where you're going in not really without any plan. I want to ask you this because when we hear the term risk taking, I think that holds us back because we see more so the negatives as opposed to the possibilities. And so I want to ask you a question similar to what I just asked you with SWC. What are some things that Siraj used, or yourself, what were some things that you used to be scared of that you're no longer scared of anymore? And how often do you apply that when it comes to risk taking, given it's a fear? Now, for example, podcasting, I used to be afraid of talking to people. Now I'm no longer, I'm still doing, it's a work in progress, but I feel like I've done a better job because I've been able to talk to people from all over the world, which is not something that I could ever see myself doing. And I'm not bragging in any sense. It's just like, wow, I'm actually being able to do this. So, as someone who embraces risk taking, what is something that you used to be fearful of that you're no longer scared of? And how often do you use that experience when it comes to the idea of risk taking?
So I think that, and going back to what I talked about, how I explained how in high school I was more of a shy, introverted kid, but even going deeper into that and unpacking that, I think that my biggest fear was I was really afraid to put myself out there because I was so afraid of people's judgment and criticism and what they would think. because when you go out and for example, like when you're going out and you start dancing, you're like, oh man, I know I look stupid. Like you're automatically gonna start dancing worse just because in your mind you assume that everybody is thinking so negatively and poorly of you. It's gonna impact your performance. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I had to overcome and work on was me being afraid to put myself out there. And that's something that going on this journey of self improving and getting into business and then realizing that, oh, just because you have a website doesn't mean that you that you have a business or that people are going to start buying from you. Because I thought once I had the Instagram page and the website, I'm like, okay, I got everything I need. People are going to, the money and the clients are going to start rolling in. If that did not happen, you have to go back again. And I had to continue to put myself out there. Even when social media first started and back in the day when people were on Facebook, we would leave from school and go to the library and get on our Facebook accounts because they wouldn't let us, our teachers wouldn't let us get on Facebook in school. My profile picture, it was like the Jumpman logo, but it wasn't my face. And I didn't have any pictures or videos on there because I was so afraid to put myself out there because I'm like, oh, like I'm ugly, like I'm awkward, like people don't like I just had all these negative connotations about myself. So going on this journey allowed me to start to take the lenses off every single time. And every time I take a step backwards and I get to see the bigger picture, I'm like, oh, okay, this is not that bad. Like, okay, me taking a picture of myself and putting it on Instagram is not that bad. Like, oh, me doing a podcast virtual interview was not that bad. And then it goes on to, oh, me doing an in-person podcast is not that bad. So keep unpacking and unpacking, unpacking. And eventually you start to get to the point where you look back and you're like, oh, wow, I don't even know what I was afraid of. It wasn't that bad for real. But in my mind, it clouded my mind so much because your mind is so powerful. It can really play tricks on you. It can really make you think a whole reality is happening when it's not. And I had that reality. I was that person. And I had to take many, many, many steps back in order to really see the bigger picture.
I would say I'm in the same boat. I was in the same boat as you. One of the reasons why one of the things I was afraid about when it came to podcasting was hearing the sound of my voice, because whenever I hear myself, I feel like I have like a really, really deep voice and I sound like Darth Vader. But then now that I look back and I realize no one's really thinking that. It's just a weird thing that I put into my mind. So it came with experience, it came with practice. And while I'm not saying that was a major fear, I will say that was a minor fear that I have been able to overcome. And now when I look back at podcast videos, I don't ever cringe based on the sound of my voice unless it's like an audio issue that I could have fixed. But failures or like mishaps, they come and go. It's just about experience. Speaking of failures, one of the last questions before I let you go, risk taking might be a beautiful thing when the product works, but it can be an ugly thing when it fails. And failure is a topic that a lot of people have talked about. And it's one of the things that we are grateful for, but we absolutely hate when we experience it. So when it comes to risk taking, I think, and it's funny because I was reading a book called The Money of, no, not The Money of Psychology, The Psychology of Money, where it was talking about how when it comes to taking risk, if you fail, you could have said to yourself, if only I had tried this route. But the thing is, you don't really know what happens in the future. You're just planning. It's almost like your best guess. So tell, and you can think about any time where you failed. What does that conversation look like with yourself? Because when you fail or when a bad thing happens to you, it's very easy to have sleepless nights. It's very easy to talk down on yourself. It's very easy to ask the hypothetical, what if I did this? I know I've done that a few times in my life, or actually a lot of times in my life. When it comes to failure, what conversations are you having with yourself that helps guide you into the right path, even though right now you're in a really bad path?
I think going back to the grade school thing where like in school, it's like, oh, like F, like you failed, like, oh, it's the end of the world. Like, I'm not gonna, what am I gonna tell my parents? Like, I'm not gonna pass the class. Like, oh, what are people gonna think about me when they see I got this 47 on my exam when everybody else got a 80 and a 96? So I think failure is something that we kind of collude in our minds. And that's another thing I had to take a step back on was realizing that failure isn't really a thing and people don't really care like how you think they care when you fail. Like even if you do fail, like you post a video, a podcast interview, when the interview only gets 10 views, yeah, you might consider that to be a failure. But other people, they either don't care, or if they do see it, they might laugh for like 2 seconds and then they're going to move on. They're going to keep scrolling at whatever they were doing. So I think that I had to take a really big step back on that and realize that failure was really just a mental thing for me, and that L's, and it's something that I like to say I'm really big on that. L's come before M's, and that's even in the alphabet, because before you get to like $1 million or 1 million followers, 1 million streams, 1 million listeners, 1 million units sold, like you have to get those lessons before then, and those lessons can also turn into losses. But you have to have those in order to get the skin that's thick enough in order for you to get what you're really looking for. And some of those lessons also are going to prepare you for when the time does come, you're going to be ready. Because if you go straight from, like you say, go straight from A to Z without going through B, C, D, E, F, and G, you're just going from A to Z, but you're not getting the alphabet. You're not getting the lesson and the purpose of what the journey was behind it. And that's another thing too, just realizing that all of this stuff is really part of the journey. So even if I do fail, quote unquote, at something, it's something I'm going to end up using it later on, because when I do win, I'm going to talk about how I failed, quote unquote, as part of the journey for when I had to build myself up to get to the point where I did win in a sense.
Yeah, I love the L and the M part. I want to use that in my personal life because I think that's really important. And yeah, again, it goes back to the alphabet in the sense that, yes, it's important to go from it. Yes, we all have this idea of going from A to Z, but we do have those mini checkpoints that we need to learn from, regardless if they're good and bad, because they're lessons that can help us in the future. My last question before I let you go, obviously, when it comes to entrepreneurship or creating a company, you want to have the most money, you want to have the most attention. I don't like using that word at times because attention can also be a bad term in a sense. But as someone who focuses a lot on helping Black owned businesses, helping people find their potential, how do you define success?
Uh, I think going back to what we talked about earlier, success can only really be judged internal. So, for example, for my parents, their expectation of me, if for me to succeed, might have been I graduate from college and then I go back and get a job in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm just working and I'm making a decent salary. I'm able to have a house, have a car, and have kids and a wife and a white picket fence. That might have been their definition of success for me, and for a lot of people, that might be their definition of success. Like, even graduate from high school, or just getting to a certain level, and then okay, once I have that level, I'm okay with that. But it's really based on internally, like how where do you see yourself being? And if for me, if I were to be in that situation, I still wouldn't find I wouldn't view myself to be successful, because I feel like I have more to give to this earth than to just have done to go on that route. And that's why I'm happy that I did go this direction, because I feel like eventually I am going to start to see the success that I dreamed of when I was a small child. So I think it's really based on your own and personal perception of where do you see yourself. If you as a kid, do you see yourself growing up and just getting a nice factory job and making $70,000 a year with a pension and being cool? That's a really good life for most people, and you're okay with that. But for me, I always envision myself to have a global impact, and I still believe that to this day. So until I achieve that, I won't say that I've been successful yet. But a lot of people, if they were in my position or circumstance, they might have already said that they've been successful, just because their bar and their level is different from what they want out of life. And that's so it's really based on what they want and what they're asking for.
I love how you worded that because everyone's going to have their own interpretation of success and they might use that interpretation on yourself. But at the end of the day, it's about what do you want? And that's not a low bar or anything. It's about being at peace and knowing that there are going to be good days, but there are going to be bad days. But there's a reason why you do the things, and there's a reason why you're doing these things. And forget what other people say. It's your life and it's your mission to impact people in whatever that way that may be. So, Siraj, I know you are a busy person running SWC, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for inspiring people, whether it's being able to find their personal or help them with their personal life, or just helping businesses get the recognition they deserve. And I wish you the best of luck on your personal life and with SWC, and I hope to meet you in person someday.
Thank you so much, Hamza, for having me. I'm excited about the podcast. You're doing a great job.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.